Thank you so much for tuning in to Mom Jeans, trying to fit into motherhood.
Welcome back to Mom Jeans, the podcast. We are your hosts. I am Lisa, a girl mom to 2 girls.
And I'm Danielle, a boy mom, a stay-at-home mom, and a military spouse.
Yeah.
And pregnant.
And pregnant. And a pregnant mom.
Yay! Yes. Very exciting.
And today we have Katy on. Katy and I are friends. We met through music class with our girls, but then somehow realized that we both golf and are golfing buddies now, and found a girls group to golf with, which is just the coolest. I love it. It has been a really, really fun thing to look forward to. And I'm excited to get summer back so we can get back into that routine, because that's such a great release for me, of being a mom and being able to do things for ourselves is really nice. But we are bringing Katy on today to talk about kind of choosing to step away from a career and maybe put our children first, and what that means. So without further ado, Katy, can you tell us a little bit about your past in the sense of a career, and then where you're at now, and then we'll start asking some questions after that.
Telling you about my past sounds so sinister.
Yes.
Yes. All my dark secrets. Yes. In terms of my career. So I was a full-time journalist for 10 years. And for the latter few of those, I was trying to get pregnant. And finally did, and had a baby, and hit those crossroads pretty hard. Where I realized that a job that had been a huge part of my identity was slipping away, and something else was coming in to fill that space. And it was incredibly disorienting and scary. But it's a happy ending to the story. I don't know how much detail to get in at the start.
Well, and we can get there. So it's an interesting thing, because I was a golf pro for 10 years, and I ended up leaving the industry before I knew I was going to get pregnant and before I wanted to have kids. But I don't know about you, but I had such a hard time letting go, even though I knew my industry was really, really challenging, and it was wearing on me, and it was making me the person I didn't want to be.
Yes.
But I started to weigh like, hey, I want summers where I can go camping with my husband instead of him going camping without me and I'm working. Did you have a hard time making that decision?
Well, I did, for a lot of reasons. The job had been my life for a really long time. I mean, not that I didn't have anything outside of it, but I identified with it completely, and it seemed like the thing that other people felt was most interesting about me. And they always had questions about it. And I worked for Time magazine, and I got to do a ton of cool stuff, and I had cover stories, and I was sort of in the mix. But the flip side of that is I was working in California, waking up every morning, and there had already been at least one news cycle, if not 2. So I was waking up feeling behind before I had kids, just trying to catch up, and then scrambling to work. And even when you get a great story out, the second that you press publish and that story is done and all your weeks of toil are out in the world, the editor turns to you and says, "What's next?" And there's a lot of anxiety about keeping up on absolutely everything, never missing anything, being the person who's completely informed all the time. And that alone was just a lot of stress to carry, coupled with where the media and the perception of the media were. This was coming up to 2020 and starting really with Sarah Palin, I would say. There was a lot of lamestream media. action, and the online world had gotten, just seemed more and more hostile and rewarding to outrage, and being in the mix was more exhausting. And I don't think I realized how sort of burnt out I was by that dynamic until I had, the lightning strike and have a child and have this chance to really reassess. And I had 4 months of maternity leave. I was very lucky, and for an American, I should say.
I was just going to say.
Yeah.
Asterisk.
Right. Yes. For an American. And I went back to work, and, I was typically working like 60-hour weeks, commuting,
Wow.
pumping in a very sad closet, bringing my milk home. And part of that, I started within the first week or two to have this realization that I was only going to see this baby at night and on the weekends. And then we got into a childcare situation, and I got sent a photo of my baby in a swing for the first time in her life, and I wasn't there. And that for me was kind of a crystallizing moment where I was weighing, I loved my job. I loved a lot of things about it, but weighing what I was getting out of it at that point, 10 years in, and what I was potentially going to miss for year 11, for year 12. And my husband and I started to have conversations about what other ways our life could look.
I always find that interesting, because I remember talking to my husband as well, to Brandon, and being like, I think I want to leave, but it's a really scary move, because that was my identity. Like, it literally was like everybody that I knew was like, oh, they knew I was a golf pro, and how cool and what an amazing job that is. And it has to be the best. And it's like, there are parts of it that I loved, but there are a lot of parts of it that really, same thing that you were talking about, like 60-hour work weeks, and a little bit different than yours, because at least mine was seasonal. The winter came, and then it was like, all right, I don't have to work, but then I'm out of work, and it's like, there are some downsides. And I just wonder, like, for me, I think my husband, we lived together my last year of being a golf pro, and he was like, I never see you. This is crazy. Like, or when I did come home, I was just crying, or like so upset about something that happened, which is so insignificant. Like, I'm not saving lives. I'm not writing stories to millions of people, right? Like, it was just it was hard though. Like, I even probably for like a year to 2 years after was like afraid to tell people I wasn't a golf pro anymore, because that's all I thought I was.
I had the exact same experience, except I'm not sure I was as good at being a journalist as you are at golf.
Oh no, that's not true.
You're amazing. I can attest. I've seen it. But I felt the same way, that was what I put all my energy into. It's who I was. It was the thing, not only being a journalist, but even my publication were so intertwined with my identity. But my husband talks about it like he would just lose me. I would stare off into space, stressed about a story, waiting for comments from an editor. Was I going to get in the paper magazine this week, or was that story going to go online? And the mental load that I was carrying was enormous. And when I stepped away, it happened to coincide with COVID, which in a way felt so freeing, because everyone was changing their life and everyone was doing something really different. And so it felt like I'm just one of millions of people who are changing what I'm doing. And for a full year, I was a full-time mom. And when people would ask me what I did, it was so bizarre in the first few weeks of that to say, I am a mom, and not identify myself as a journalist anymore. And I ended up freelancing some that first year and had one big story come out. sort of like a last hurrah, and gradually got more and more used to it. But I also had other interests. So I was picking up some freelance work.
Mm-hmm.
And but then it takes a while in a new industry to identify as that too. So I had a real identity, like, who am I? What am I, for years after I decided to step away.
That's interesting. So had you seen like other people like, cuz you were working in an office, you weren't working from home, right? Is what you said.
Yeah.
So what was it like did like I don't know that industry very well, the journalist industry, but was it like, did you have other friends that were in the industry, and when did you tell them like, hey, I'm leaving, and did anybody say anything, or because it was COVID it was a little bit different?
I think because it was COVID, everything was so shaken up that, no one was really batting an eye at anything at that point. And I actually had a funny experience where I made this big decision and I had my meeting with HR and I said, I'm leaving. I'm going to quit on this day. And we were getting ready to sell our house. We were living in the Bay Area at the time. And they had taken photographs of the house and it was going to go live the next day. And that is when the shelter in place orders came down. So the house couldn't be listed. And we were in California, which was very strict. So you couldn't go into other people's homes. You couldn't look at homes. Like, selling a home became impossible overnight. And I had to go back to HR and basically say, so never mind. Like, could I stay on for a while? Because we still had a mortgage payment to make. And they were wonderful. They were very gracious and said, sure. And we had, for some period of months, while we were still trying to move, worked out a schedule where I used the paid time off that I had accrued. I took off Monday. We had a grandma who traveled up to be with us Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. My husband took off Friday with his PTO. And we were in this, bubble pattern for a while before I quit. So the transition was all kind of messy and bizarre in that way. It wasn't like I'm going into a normal office one day and then I'm not anymore. But there was still a kind of seismic moment of the email is shut off, the benefits are gone, the byline is gone. Like, now you are just you in the world. And one of the most wonderful things about it is realizing that I was very mistaken about how much of my identity was that job. I had the proportions all wrong, that I would still absolutely be me on the other side, but you can't really know that until you do it.
That's such a great point, really, because like I've talked to other people in my industry and been like, they're like, oh man, I want to get out. Like, I'm so envious you got out. And I was in a very lucky position because Brandon financially could take care of us, where I had time to figure it out. And I picked up a part-time job immediately just to kind of figure out what it was I was going to do. And I know a lot of people aren't as lucky as I am in that situation, but it was such an interesting thing. And most of them come back to, I don't know who I would be or what I would do. And I'm like, oh, I know, but aren't you so like run down by the hours, and it's so hard to not see your kids and all of that? And they're like, yeah, but what would I do? What would I do? And I'm like, I feel you. That's so hard. I mean, I'm in such a lucky position that I was able to do that.
I felt that way too. When I quit my job, I was a teacher for 10 years, and same thing. It's like, how, before I had my son, I would think like, if I wasn't teaching, what else would I do? How can I, like, my degree, how can I use that elsewhere in another career if I wanted to do so? So it's just like, I don't know, when you go to college for that and that's what you've been doing for the last 10 years of your life, it's tough. But
with that, the cool part is the opportunity, though, of you give up this thing and you have nothing, but that also means you can try anything. And I too, because we moved to a place with a lower cost of living, which was a big part of this plan, we could live on my husband's salary. He was working remotely. And I was able to freelance and get into a totally new industry and start doing that, and realized like that the skill set I had actually was applicable in another context. And how exciting that like there wasn't only one way to use a English literature degree, which of course my parents gave me a hard time about as being very impractical when I got it. And it ended up being really thrilling on the other side, even though, I had a lot of anxiety, especially when you see statistics about the difficulties of women re-entering the workforce, right? Oh, you're trying to get hired as a 50-year-old woman, right? And the obstacles you face and the pay cuts you have to take and the title demotions that you have to deal with and the competition. I was looking at all of that before I quit and thought, like, am I just harpooning myself? Have I been sort of working up through these ranks and now I'm just going to dive off into nothing? But there's a lot out there, turns out.
Isn't that crazy? Like, especially when you get out of college, because you were in college, like Danielle was just saying, you were in college for something and you're like, I'm going to work as hard as I can to do the best I can. And while I was in the thick of my career of like, that was my whole life. I was like, I started to question, like, will I ever get married? Will I ever have a normal life? Will I ever be able to travel because of how intense the industry was? And I didn't know that there was anything else on the outside of it, right? Or even if there was, even if I did happen to get married and have a kid, I didn't think about the logistics of what it would take to have a kid, but also trying to work 60 to 65-hour work weeks. Like there's no way I could have been a golf pro the way I was and have a kid. Like it just I wouldn't have been the mom I want to be, to say it that way. I'm sure I could have done it. It just wouldn't be the mom I wanted to be, like you said. So it's very interesting.
Yeah,
Danielle, go ahead. Sorry. No, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, like, I could have done it too. And I have a bunch of colleagues who continue to work full time and have kids, and they're amazing. And I don't know what their exact approach to work-life balance is, but they're doing it and thriving, doing all of those things. But for me personally, I think where I was at burnout wise, with the one job and having this new career as a mom open up in front of me, and then the other opportunities that came with that, was just a kind of a chance I had to take.
That's pretty amazing. How did you end up finding your way to the freelance work that you started to do? Like, did you know somebody who did it?
I did. I had written about language a lot. It was a real passion of mine. For some years, I did a column on language every week. And that could be like back when Russia invaded Crimea. I did a piece about why it's Ukraine and not the Ukraine, and the politics of a definite article and how people feel about that. Like in that example, that the Ukraine makes it sound like something you can own. Right. Mm-hmm. Something small, not like a country. Or I would write about, news slang words and how the phrase hot mess has a 150-year history that you didn't know about. And where did this come from when Amy Schumer's movie was coming out? And I just love this stuff. And one of the things I ended up writing about were these specialty firms that name things. Like, tons of stuff that you've heard of. I'd written about these firms that specialize in naming often new products and companies, things like the Swiffer or cars or items on a McDonald's menu. A lot of big corporations come to them, but also small businesses. and I always really wanted to do it. I thought it would be the best gig on earth. As I was winding down in my journalist job, I reached out to one of the partners at one of these firms, and I asked if we could have lunch. And I said, I know I've used you as a source in stories to talk about names, but basically I'd like to audition for you. Like, I want to do it. And I asked to audition for them, and they let me. And over the period during COVID, that went from one little sample gig to regular work. And it's what I do now. So it was one of those, like, use your network, ask someone out to lunch, and the door, like, cracked open and then opened gradually further.
That's amazing. That's awesome. So do you pick up work when you want to? Like, how does it work in the sense of, like, being able to balance the work life that you like to do?
Well, I work regularly with one firm, and they have enough work for me to do every week if I want. Oh. But I can say yes or no. And if one of my kids gets sick, I just say no, and I don't work that week. And if everything's going great, then I could do a project for them. It's really flexible. It's great.
That's amazing. That's kind of a dream, especially, you know, as your kids get older, and who knows what activities they'll be involved in. And, you know, we've talked about the Flagstaff way of, you know, if your kid ends up being in a sport and you have to commute down to Phoenix a bunch to go to games and stuff like that, it's like, oh man, what a dream and I think a lot more and more, it sounds like the companies are starting to not allow full-time remote, and they're trying to push people more into the office. And it's really nice if you can continue to be able to have that balance and be there for your kids the way you want to be there for your kids. I mean, I think, Danielle, you know, Danielle, remind us again, like, did you always know you wanted to be a stay-at-home mom?
No, we should talk about that story sometime though. But yeah, I was planning on going back. I had to pay to get out of my teaching contract. I had to pay like $3,000. I had to pay them to get out of my contract. It was ridiculous. Yeah. So I decided last minute that I was getting more anxious and anxious, like the closer it got. I was lucky that I had my 3 months maternity leave and then 3 months over the summer, because teachers, we don't get summer. We just don't get paid over the summer.
Right.
So like I had like 6 months off and decided not to go back. And as soon as I, talked to my supervisor or my principal, like just a relief off my shoulder was like amazing. There was a couple reasons I didn't want to go back, but one of the main reasons is I knew that I wouldn't be able to give my job 100%, my husband 100%, my child 100%, and even myself. So it's like I had to give up something to be able to know that, I don't know, like, because I want to be there for my son, and I still want to be a good wife, and I also still want to take care of myself. So I just knew like somewhere was going to get like not my full attention, and it most likely was going to be my job and my students, and they don't deserve that. So they deserve someone that's going to be like fully tentative and like there, and not me counting down the hours when I get to go pick up my son from daycare. So, but that was one of the main reasons anyways.
It's such a crazy thing. So I was reading some stats the other day, and I know you guys have heard this story a million times because I talk about it a lot, but like all the other countries and what it is that they get for leave and get to, like, it's mandatory for certain countries that your employer has to keep in mind you being a good parent, and they are very strictly watch the employer if you are not giving your employees the capability to be flexible for your kids. And I'm like, can you even imagine that? Like, can you imagine, it's like Brandon has a great job. It's awesome. And he is fairly flexible in his job, but at the same time, he'll turn to me and be like, I have to work. Right. And I'm like, it's really difficult because it's like, I have two part-time jobs, and it's like, as much as I'm supposed to be the one who's flexible and be able to do stuff, it is nice every once in a while for him to be able to stay home with the kids if they're sick. But he gets guilt from that, right? And he's the dad, and that's a totally different, it's so different. Like, I remember going to Sweden and being in Sweden and being on one of their walking tours in Stockholm, and they're like, yeah, between the two parents, we get 2 years off and we can split that how we want, but the dad has to take 90 days. And I was like, skirt, hold on a second. It's like, what? Excuse me? That's not real. And at that point, I was far from being married, having kids, or even thinking I would have that. But I was like, all right, if I get pregnant, I'm moving here, like, I wonder about that a little bit. Do you think that if you got more maternity leave paid, that you would have made a different decision for yourself to go back to that industry? Or were you guys both like, all right, I'm out, I'm good, I'm fulfilled?
If I had more time to think about it, like if I might have just waited and then decided if I was going to go back or not, if they're going to pay me, to stay.
Mm-hmm.
But they talk about, one of the other reasons I stay, because they talk about like the attachment theory or whatever for children, like the first 3 years of their life. So like 2 years, yeah, that's awesome. Two parents can stay home with their child and they get that secure attachment with you and your spouse. Like, that's amazing. And that could change my, idea of what I do. But I don't know. I plan on, I'm having another. So it's like, I might as well stay home until they go to school or a homeschool. Yeah. I don't know. Yeah. What about you, Katie?
I don't think I would have made a different decision. Like, I felt very well treated at my job with the amount of time that I got. And I don't think the mood around the media or the difficulties and challenges of that job have lessened very much. So I think I would have ended up making the same choice. Ours was also, financial, where my husband and I both had to work long hours to afford living in the Bay Area, to pay a mortgage, but then to pay childcare on top of that. There was no way one of us could move into part-time. So we had to move. And my job couldn't move with me. Like, I was reporting from San Francisco and I could not do that job from Flagstaff, Arizona. So I had a choice of whether to leave or not. That would have been the same if it had been 6 or 8 months. It was
that makes sense.
Big change or nothing for me.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I think, I think it's interesting. Like, here we go into Lisa's conspiracy theory. So just hang on tight. I think the whole AI thing, I know it's scary and I know people find it scary, but I kind of wonder if it will afford people to be able to work less because they won't be needed as much because there are other things that can take those positions, and it'll force kind of the workload around into the same industries where it's going to be like, okay, realistically, we work 30-hour work weeks and that's everybody, whatever. I've thought about that a lot to try to make myself feel better. Like, I'm not going to get squashed by a robot, but here we are. I don't know. Like, I do think it's interesting. Like, I was reading about Germany, and Germany, I don't, can't believe everything you read. Katie, you can testify to that, I'm sure. But I was reading some things about Germany and how they are making incentives to get people to work more because they have a huge issue with people not working more. And I think their average hours worked were between 28 and 32 hours a week. And Fabulous. I was like, right?
So nice.
Can you imagine? Like, I just feel like, because I work 20 hours a week at my primary job, and I feel like I go in, I'm super efficient because I know I don't have that much time and I need to get my stuff done. And then I leave and I'm like, okay, bye. Like in my old work, like my phone was on me, my email was still on. I'd be at home. I'd be trying to talk to my husband and also reading an email. Again, we're working in the golf industry. Who needs to be reading their email at 8 p.m. when the golf course is pitch black? What are we doing here? Right? I just can't, like, I just try to imagine a world where this is not an option that needs to be made or a decision that needs to be made.
Well, I also, I've had this thought a few times as we're thinking about this, but I will not be the first person to make this point, but being a mom is much harder than the job I was doing. Like doing that 24 hours a day, 7 days a week is so much harder than 60 hours a week. And even now that I'm working part-time, I've never worked harder. Like, I can't even remember this version of me that worked 60 hours a week because maybe I would do 20 hours of paid work. But like you say, it's efficient. I'm on the clock. I'm keeping track. I am so deep into it. And on every side of that is taking care of the house, doing the laundry, picking up the kids, doing the activities, like financial management of the household, kids getting sick. I feel like I work way harder now doing 20 hours a week than I did when I was doing 60 without kids. I mean, it's not even comparable.
Yeah, I agree.
I've talked to Danielle a bunch about it because I don't think I could ever do the full-time stay-at-home mom thing. Like, of course, if I had to, I would. And, Katy, remind me, during COVID, did you guys have childcare or did you not have childcare?
No,
you didn't.
It was just me and one daughter for a year.
Yeah.
My husband was around. I don't want to act like he wasn't contributing, but for working hours, it was just the two of us.
That's amazing to me. It's like, especially Danielle, where you live, she lives on base and they have stuff, but like even here, like even when it's like a Saturday and it's a snowy day, I'm like, what do I do with my kids? I can't stay in the house the whole day. Okay, we're going to go walk the aisles at Target and you guys are going to play with every toy I will not buy you, because like, how do you plan every single day? And then it's not like, yes, your husbands are home on weekends and they're not working, but it's still like, I'm with you guys 7 days a week. It's a lot. Danielle, you're an incredible person. Katy made it through COVID. I just like, I feel like I need my part-time job just to have sanity, like I just need to be able to get out, have adult conversations. And like Hannah turns 3 on Saturday and we have a full-on teenager and she is so sassy and so yelling at me all the time and commands. And I'm like, okay, like she's throwing my parenting back in my face. And I'm like, got to get better at that. All right, cool. Check. Like add it to my list to try and figure out when to find time to like sit down and figure out how I'm going to parent better. It's just a lot. You're right, Katy. It's a lot.
I don't know if you all have discussed Emily Oster, the economist. Yes. So I love her. And one of the things she discussed in her book was her decision to go back to work. And she said something to the effect of, maybe I'm a great parent for the first and second hour with my kids, but by the third hour, none of us are getting much out of it. Like we're all kind of struggling. Whereas at work, she was like the third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth hour can still be very productive and are great. And like, that's just me, and these types of breakdowns work for me and what I'm good at and what's best for our family dynamics. And I loved reading that, way before I had made my own decision to leave the job, just as someone sort of giving you permission to not be weighed down by guilt that you have to be there every moment or you're a selfish monster. You know, like all of those things come into play with this too.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah, like today I was having a hard day, and there's days like today, like I question like me staying home, so as soon as my husband came home and we had dinner, I like didn't even say I was going to a different room. I just left because he was playing with Weston, and I left and laid on the bed for like a good hour until they came up for bath time. I was like, I just need a quiet moment to myself. But
I think
yeah,
that's the hard thing to me. Like, even I'll be home with the girls alone for like an hour, and I'm like texting Brandon, like, when are you coming home? Are you going to be able to come home right at 5? Can you leave at 4:45? Like, I need help. You know, it's like, it's been an hour. Like, how bad is this? You know, to be fair, you know, and I've read this too, like, you're their safe place, especially the moms. You're the safe place. And so when she's had a really hard day and keeping it together all day at daycare, and then she comes home and she's like, oh, I can release. Then I get the like, whoa, like my parents call her Hurricane Hannah. You get the Hurricane Hannah where you're like, I can't even move. Or she's like, I didn't want you to move that way, move the other way. And I'm like, oh God, I'm being run by a 2-year-old. Like, this is crazy. But it's, I mean, you know, it like, and I've talked about this before, Katie, like I went through an incredibly bad depression before Hannah was born while I was pregnant, because I was so scared my life was over and that I was a traveler, you know, I was working a million hours. Like I did so many things that I was like, oh, I'm not going to be able to get any of this once I have my kid. And then I had her and I was going through postpartum depression, though I didn't realize I had it. And I didn't realize it actually until probably Hannah turned almost 2 years old. Like it was a long time, but it's been the best thing that's ever happened to me. It is, and people say it all the time. It's so cliche. It's been the best thing that's ever happened to me, but the hardest thing I have ever done in my life and will ever do. It's an incredible experience, but we're here. We're doing it.
Yeah.
We're doing it.
It's
somehow or another.
I felt like that the first time I got pregnant, that my friends didn't have kids and my life was over, but then I lost that pregnancy. And the whole thing was horrid. Part of what was so hard is that I felt like I had become a mom and no one else could see that. And I had completely changed. And it's funny looking back on like me having FOMO during those months when I was pregnant. Because then afterwards I was just desperate to be pregnant again. And I think, you know, all these journeys are so personal and it's all about perspective. And I've become a person that my younger self wouldn't recognize. Even like after someone who lost a pregnancy, I became a completely different person that like the previous version of myself could not have understood. And for me, one of the silver linings of that was that once I was pregnant again and this baby was coming, I was just so grateful, you know?
Aww.
And I am grateful for the gratitude that I was able to bring to that experience, so that the FOMO, there was none of that the second time. I was just so damn happy to be growing a baby that I like could not have cared less about not traveling or not being able to do this stuff with the friends that I was worried about the first time. And it's something that like I carry with me still, you know, that, but I guess I just want to say like, I do totally relate to that, but moms are faced with these impossible expectations of being everything and doing everything. And we are all on such individual journeys, to get to wherever we are, like working, not working, traveling, not traveling, having kids, not having kids at all, that like it's all okay. And we should all just be nice to each other. That's all I want. Please.
Yeah. For sure.
Isn't that the truth? I was just listening to, goodness, now I'm going to have to think about which, it was a TED Talk, I think. And she was talking about if everybody experienced this, I think the world would have complete peace. And I was like, that's heavy. Like, can you imagine, like, if we didn't fight like this and we didn't, it's just, Katy, I think that's such an awesome perspective for you to have after having such a horrible, loss like that. And then to be able to look so wonderfully at your experience the next go around, it's just, it's so amazing. It's inspiring. It's really inspiring, because that's great perspective to be able to look like that. I can't even imagine that. Can't imagine that. Yeah.
I remember learning after that happened and I lost the pregnancy. It wasn't shortly after that I was at some journo thing and was hobnobbing, and an older gentleman was by me and was like, "Oh, do you have kids?" And I said no, and inside I'm already crying. And he goes, "Oh, someday you'll want them." Like, I had no desire, and I was just a selfish girl out in the world, and I was so mad about it. And, but I had to realize that I'm sure I had asked other people if they had kids without any thought for the emotional context they might have before that. And, you learn those things as you go along and you change. And now I try to never ask people if they're going to have a second or
right,
if they have kids or not, because like you might be casually opening their deepest wound, and not know it.
That's a great point, because like we talk about, unfortunately, I want to know everything about every person I've ever met on the planet. Like, I want to know, it's just like something innate. Like, I can't control it. And I remember, I think it was probably, I'm trying to remember if it was before Leah or after Leah. She goes to our school as well, but she was on the podcast for a while, but she had a lot of problems getting pregnant and ended up doing IVF, and it was 3 years of infertility, and it was just awful. And I remember her telling me, like, it's hard when people ask, like, "Oh, why don't you have kids?" It's like, yeah, like and Danielle's sister-in-law, Michaela, has chosen not to have kids. And like, I, for a long time, was not fair to her. And I kept being like, why aren't you going to have kids? You would be an amazing mom. You would be an amazing mom. And I was like, like, finally, I think something clicked in me. I was like, holy cow, just because I have an opinion doesn't mean it should be everybody else's opinion. And I am a very opinionated person. I need to work on that. And I need to work on not wanting to hear everything about everybody and asking everything. Cause like, I want, I want people to feel comfortable around me and not like, oh, Lisa's grilling me again. Like, oh, be telling you my deepest, darkest secrets.
Yeah, no, that's so funny. It's okay. When Michaela told me to, I got teary-eyed. We had been drinking, so I was already emotional. I was like, Weston's not going to have cousins. She's like, how close are you to your cousins? I'm like, okay, touche. But yeah, same thing. Like, I had a pregnancy loss before this one, and people, or one of Ryan's friends or coworkers, he was like, y'all going to have another? And Ryan's like, yeah, like we want more. And then he's like, well, don't wait too long, because you don't want him to be too far away from your son. And we had just like, it'd been like not even a month. And it just like killed me inside. I was like, it's not from the lack of trying. And like, we've also had to do some infertility stuff, not IVF, but like to help us get pregnant, and same with our son. So it's just like, it's a process. And I was thinking about it today. I was like, after this one, either it's just going to come naturally if we have another one or not. Like, I don't want to have to go through, because it's hard, like just going through, like, I don't know, medical cycles and stuff. It's just too much. But for me, anyways.
It's amazing. Like Michaela is she is in sort of the medical field, but she's like, you guys don't understand how incredible it is that people can have babies. Like, your bodies are incredible that they can do that. And I'm like, yeah, whatever. And then I like started to really think about it, and I was like, I mean, she's really right. Like, that it is incredible. Our bodies find ways to do this.
My dad is a retired doctor, and as we were going through the pregnancy loss, he said something much like that to me about the miracle upon miracle upon miracle upon miracle that have to occur in a row for a healthy baby to come out on the other side, and that your body protects you and protects any future child by, making choices along that journey. And there aren't always going to be a miracle at every step, and how absolutely wonderful it is when it does occur. And I found that very comforting and beautiful.
That is.
Yeah.
That is amazing. I mean, we've talked about it before, and the reason this podcast started, Danielle she had the brainchild, but it was very much like, you can feel so alone sometimes in the journey you're going on, because nobody's is the same, right? Like, it's incredible to see what we've gone through, getting pregnant, our pregnancies, the birth itself, what kind of baby one baby is to the next, because my two have been such different kids. And it's like, I was like, oh, I'm having a second kid. I know what I'm doing. I'm going to do awesome at this. And then Aubrey was like, ha, yeah, right. You think you got this? No chance. Like, she's a firecracker, and Hannah's already a firecracker. And I'm like, geez, Louise, like, it's just it's an incredible thing to be here and to be able to talk to people about their journeys, and literally nobody's is the same. And it's just, that's what we wanted. Danielle really wanted this podcast to be, so you didn't feel alone if you didn't have a good network of people. And, Katy, you and I have talked recently, the last time we golfed, about how it'd be hard to leave Flagstaff because of the network that you've built and that I've built, and starting to build more, right? Like with the golf group and everybody having kids in the golf group, and you guys having kids that are older than mine, where I'm like, oh, teach me all your ways. It's like, you're my expert. So I love it. It's just like, it's really nice to have this podcast, because we call it, we've debated changing the name to we need a therapist. Somebody come on and just be our therapist, because it's our way of releasing every week,
My good friend who lives here, Lauren, we joked during COVID about there needing to be a podcast for moms called Nobody Is Okay.
Yeah. That's a great one.
It would be an excellent title.
Yes. It's so amazing. It's so hard.
Yes.
It's so hard, guys. But we're doing it. We're killing it. Right?
Yeah, I think so. I don't know. There's days I'm struggling, but yeah, that's why I wanted this community, was just to be able to talk about our struggles and how normal it is. Because like today, I felt like a terrible mom just because I was just, that, and I'm having really bad pregnancy fatigue. So it's just like, I feel a little on edge and trying to be a good mom, but then the whining is getting to me because my son's like almost 2. And so like the whining and the tantrums are starting. And some days I can deal with it just fine. And then there's other days it's like in my head, I'm like, please stop whining. Like, I just need a break. So I'm struggling with that, just feeling like a bad mom to even have those thoughts. Like I should just be on it all the time. But I don't know how anybody can do that. And if you say that you can, I don't believe you. So it's just a
No,
struggle sometimes.
no one can do it all the time. Like everyone gets burnt out. Everyone gets overstressed. And kids are nuts.
Wild.
Yes. That,
Yes.
I think, is what we should
Kids are
title
nuts.
this episode. Kids are nuts.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Yes. It is incredible because I think about this, and I've thought about this before, kids too. Like I try to think about how my friends would tell me to handle a situation when I'm being really hard on myself. So like when I'm like, oh man, I was a bad mom today. I did this and that and the other thing. And I try to think like, okay, if I told my friends that, like, would they be like, yeah, you were a really bad mom. Like, don't do that again. Or if they would be like, why are you so hard on yourself? You know, I used to do that, like body shaming myself. I'd be so hard on myself for eating whatever. And then it would be like, all right, like, what would I say to my friends if I were in that situation? But it's not always easy to do that. You know?
I had that big time when we had a second. And Danielle, it sounds like it'll be similar age gaps ish. Because my daughter just turned 3 when we had a second. And I just felt like I was being a terrible mom to everybody. Like I couldn't give the second one the same devoted attention that I gave to the first one, you know, and meanwhile I'm neglecting her and everyone's crying all the time. And I just felt like I'm, you know, not even to speak of like my relationship with my husband or myself. Like it was just such a struggle. And it was really other moms who got me through it, reminding me things like when you have a second, yes, it's true. The bandwidth that you have to bring to parenting, each of them in the moment is different, but you've been able to give them the gift of a witness to their entire life, of the only other person in the world who will really understand how crazy their parents are. You know,
Yes.
all of these things that are beautiful and have longevity that could be 100 years. So like, yes, maybe the experience is different, but like overall, you know, you can certainly make an argument that like you're giving them something more, even if it feels like less today.
Yeah.
And it's like that absolutely carried me through like the difficult moments, these perspectives that I got from other moms.
I love that.
That's a great perspective too. Like it's so funny because like somebody made a comment to me one time, and I think it was because they only had one kid, and it was like a little bit bitter, I would say, about not having a second kid. And they were like, it's the wrong reason to have kids. You don't even know if they'll like each other or they'll talk to each other in the end. And I said, you know, I really hope that I can help be a foundation for them to have that relationship, right? Like my brother and I are so tight. Like we talk daily, multiple times a day. I'm so lucky growing up. Not the case. Like we fought a lot. And, you know, it's so funny now to see Aubrey's 1 and Hannah's almost 3. And like Hannah is rough on Aubrey. And Aubrey doesn't know any other way. So then she just wails on her back as a 1-year-old. She's like grabbing her hair and cat fighting. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like, but I think that's going to teach them a lot of things down the road. And I hope they have each other and enjoy that. And Katy, you're right. Like I've gotten to the point now where like they'll play with each other a little bit or entertain each other while I can make dinner. Whereas like before it was like Hannah only had me and it was like hanging on me and pick me up. And I'm like, I can't do anything. It's so nice to have them like, you know, eventually to be able to entertain each other and to really love each other and help each other through some hard things. Because, you know, like when I was a kid, telling my parents things was not the easiest in certain situations, but my brother was always there and he would never tell my parents. And it was so wonderful. You know, I'm so lucky that I had that. So I think that's a great way to look at that. Cause I know a lot of people were like, I was in mourning at the end of my second pregnancy, thinking about my first not getting all the attention and love that that I can give them because there's going to be another one to share with. And I think I talked to enough people who had multiple kids that were like, oh, your heart just grows, right? It's not like you're taking less away or more away from your first. You're just expanding that love. And I was like, I was lucky. I think I listened to that well enough that I was like, all right. And then when Aubrey was born, I was like, oh man, they're so right. Like, it's just, I can't be there for Aubrey in every single situation, or Hannah, both of them, in every situation that I want to be, but it's teaching them something, right? Mm-hmm. Like, it's teaching them patience. It's teaching them understanding that you may not get everything you want immediately. And I like that.
Yeah, that's a good point. Because I feel the same too. People have been telling me the same, but it's just like, it feels different. Like, I'm like, how am I going to give him all like the attention that he has now? And I don't know, share. But I'm sure it's just going to happen. It's just how it's meant to be. Yeah. But I think that's kind of normal to have those thoughts.
Yeah, definitely.
But,
yeah. Well, it's also a real struggle, and it takes a long time to change that dynamic. A good friend of mine said the best metaphor for having the second kid and how your first kid feels about it is, what if your spouse came home one day and said, here's my second wife. You will now be sharing me with them. And in every moment, at every meal, and at bedtime.
That just, it makes me feel worse.
No, but it's just to give you empathy with like how hard the transition is for the first kid.
Yeah.
But eventually they will come around and see the benefits. Like, I'm in that period now. My younger one is 2, and they're starting to play together, and it's beautiful and fruitful and productive and gorgeous. And I'm seeing flickers of just how gorgeous it can be down the road. But it is for a long time like the second wife scenario. And like, you just have to hold space for everybody's feelings about that, because it's a big change. Like, it is really different. And like, it's okay that it's hard, and it's okay if there's a lot of crying in certain situations as things change for a while, because there is something beautiful that is forged in fire, on the other side of that.
Yeah.
It's an interesting question. So my mom is one of 4, and I always loved, like, we were super tight with our cousins, and our Christmases were like a shit show because there were a million people and everybody's talking, and I loved it. I loved the chaos of it. So growing up, I was like, I'm going to have 4 kids. I'm going to do it. And then I like had Aubrey, and I was like, go get your vasectomy right now, Brandon. Right now. And I was like, how do people do this? It is incredible to me. And I'm not dogging on people that have a lot of kids. I'm saying, holy moly, how do you do it?
Hats off to you.
Yeah. Yes. I thought you were showing me your gray hair.
No.
I've gained gray hair.
I have some. Don't worry.
I'm gaining gray hair. I can't see your hair. I'm not saying you have gray hair. I just am like, I'm getting gray hair from 2 kids, and I'm 38 years old, and I'm like, if I had 4 kids, can I imagine?
No, I don't even have the energy sometimes for 1, so 2's gonna be. I have a feeling this one's gonna be a boy too, so we'll see. It's just gonna be wild in my house.
It's interesting to me too, like, whole nother topic, and we can cut this off here soon because I could keep going forever. But can you imagine having kids at 18?
No. However, I think about that sometimes, and I'm like, man, I'd be a young parent, and they'd be out the door when I'm like 50. I can retire and like live my life. Now I'm gonna be a grandma age when my kids leave, probably.
Yeah. So. Yeah, there's certainly upsides. I have a good friend who was the first in our friend group to have a kid, and it was not planned, and was maybe early 20s.
Wow.
And I think they mostly did it alone. I feel guilty. I'm not sure how much I even checked in on them. And I know it was really hard for a long time, but they have a teenager now. And I have a 2-year-old, and they are looking like just two of them, an empty nest in a few years. It's incredible. And I'll be 100 at their college graduation.
Yeah, I love that too. My two best friends, they were 21 when they had theirs. And I'm like, man, you're missing out on this college experience and like drinking and look at, no, I wasn't saying that, but of course I was thinking that because we were young and like, but now I'm like, yeah, like you said, they're 10. So 8 more years and she's, he's off to college.
I think both ways, right? Like a certain part of me is like, man, I had an amazing 20s. Like my 20s were amazing. And then my up till, I think it was 35 when Hannah was born. And I'm like, I had an awesome time. I still have an awesome time, but you know what I mean? Like, and I think about that, but I didn't have the money to kind of do all the stuff I wanted to. And I guess if your kids get out of the house earlier, you have the money to go do the things, but my body is already not working the way I want it to work. I can't imagine waiting until I'm like 50, 60 to be able to go do all the things I did when I was in my 20s and 30s.
Yeah, that's why you do it now. You just make it work. If you want to go do those things. Yeah, because then if you wait till you get old, then like you said, you're just going to be too old to do it. I don't know.
I know this is bad to say. This is like, don't lock me up. But there were times where I was like, listen, Hannah is sleeping in the crib as a baby. Would anybody actually know if we like just ran out to dinner really quick? Or if we like just ran to the grocery store without her? Like, would anybody actually, they would probably see us and be like, where's your kid? And I'd have to come up with like, we got a babysitter to go to the grocery store. Totally. It's crazy. But
at least she was sleeping. That part sounds
yeah. She doesn't sleep anymore. It's the worst. I keep saying like, maybe by the time she's 10, I'll be able to sleep. This will be great. Or we'll get it like conquered and then Aubrey will stop sleeping. It's like, you know how that goes. It's crazy. I know. Well, anyway, any closing thoughts, Katy? Come back sometime and talk about other things because this was great.
Well, just thank you for creating this and caring about solidarity among moms. I had no idea how important that would be for me until I became a mom. And there are a lot of ways that, however supportive, your hetero partner, in my case, they just don't quite get all the things the way that other moms do. And the more spaces we have to connect and be honest about the hard parts and the good parts, I think the better for all of us. So bravo to both of you.
Yes.
And congratulations to Danielle.
Yay, thank you. Yes.
That was beautifully said.
I'm excited.
Yes.
And that wraps up another episode of Mom Jeans, trying to fit into motherhood. Thank you again so much for listening to us. And if you enjoyed this podcast, please consider giving us 5 stars so other mothers out there like you can find us and listen. If you would like, you could follow us on any of our socials at Mom Jeans, the podcast. If you have questions, would like to send us your birth story, or give us suggestions or things that you would like to hear, please email us at hello@momjeansthepodcast.com. See you next week.